Hello, my name is April Lee Fields, and I'm going to be reading a chapter from my book, A Version of You. This chapter's called Hitchhiker's Heart. Each step that Beau had taken towards my placement on the veranda had echoed out in remembrance of the last few words that I had said to him on the phone. Fuck thudded out from his left foot whilst you creaked out from beneath his right. Beau's body upon arrival was riddled with a justified uncertainty. However, with my bitterness having finally left me, I stood up to face Beau without a trace of venom. And disturbed from their slumber, the mountains behind us began to wipe the dreams away from their leaf-crusted eyes and clambered onto one another's jagged backs in order to get a better view of us. The soupy afternoon air was filled with great expectations. As I walked towards Beau, teardrops leaned out from the pale windows of his eyes and looked down upon me hesitantly, as if they were unsure of their commitment to the jump. The sweaty rowboat that rested upon my upper lip began to take in too much water, and as it sunk, it pressed down my jaw towards the floor in weighted shock. And like blackout curtains, Beau's eyelashes drew themselves to a close, wobbling and twitching in the same manner as the body that held them. And after a moment of exhalation, they regained composure, and the impenetrable curtain of Beau's thick eyelashes reopened in order to bathe me in their luminescent light. Beau and I stood upon the veranda that afternoon, embracing one another tenderly. Though after a moment the electricity that had been pulsating out of his body began to zap me, chest to chest, I felt the freight train of Beau's heart pounding off its tracks, and it was coming straight towards my tranquility. See me. Beau's inner desires throbbed as they rode the roller coaster of his heartbeat to the point of throwing up. The aromatic scent of his skin sent me into a wave of intoxication, whilst the clean air attempted to permeate the smell of cigarettes and desperation that clung to him. Our perspiration merged into one another like two rivers that met at the mouth of the sea. And as I breathed in deeply, I inhaled the wild fire of a forgotten love. The mountains, they fanned us with their breath in an attempt at bringing our temperatures down, yet as the flames between Beau and I grew uncontrollably wild, I decidedly withdrew back into the safety net of my own serenity. Placing his heavy bags down upon the floor, Beau put a cigarette to his lips, as if to stop his mouth from prematurely spilling tales of his journey from it. Exhaustion gathered beneath his eyes like two sacks of earth-saturated potatoes, and I knew from the sight of him that Beau had just arrived from an almighty adventure, a pilgrimage of love. A fleeting feeling of expectation pushed itself through the barriers that I had just then placed around my heart. Because although any other girl in her right mind would have gone weak at the knees at such a heroic voyage of romance, the instability in Beau began to feel dangerous to me. However, as I looked into those eager blue eyes, I saw that, as always, they expected nothing from me. As the mountainous sisters held their breath and leaned in closer for a better view, fueled with the desire to insert new gossip into their foliage, Bo and I, we gradually fell back into orbit with one another. The afternoon air attempted to loosen up our voice boxes as I listened to Bo draw tales of a hitchhike that had spanned out all the way from Melbourne up to Murwillumbah. 1,600 kilometers of truck stops, defiant thumbs, and dangerous highways had all been crossed in order to get Bo to exactly where he was standing. And he wore the scent of sleeplessness upon his nicotine-saturated skin as if it were an aphrodisiac. I knew that before our conversation furthered, Bo needed to catch up on some rest. So retreating into the kitchen, I made Bo a peanut butter and jam sandwich and watched with amusement as he tried to eat it without falling asleep in the jam. I then pulled back the covers of a bed that had once been just for me and laid his electrically charged body to rest within it, promising to speak more the next day. And as Bo deliriously mumbled about a truck driver that had been touched by his pilgrimage and helped him along the way, the mountains dismounted one another's backs in an unsatisfied retreat, finally joining Bo in a warm and lucid sleep. The next morning found me with a serene pep in my step. I had had time to digest the implications of Bo's quest for love, and I could not help but to admire his determination. When Bo had finally awoke from his coma, I introduced him to our hosts, Tony and Teresa. Though knowing that our tranquility had been compromised due to that which I had previously told them about Bo and I, our hosts each circled Bo like two eagles protecting their nest. He is welcome here, as long as that's what you want. Tony and Therese had both unanimously decided. What I want. What I want. Those three words bounced around the kitchen walls and did cartwheels off of the spatulas. They barely skimmed past the cookie container before crashing into the wind chime. Then after falling down into the depths of a prison that was hanging beneath the jar, the words then projected a rainbow of unity as my final answer. By the time that late afternoon sun had tardily punched into the time clock, Ben and I had found a quiet retreat beside a ravishing and radiant creek. The water glittered beneath the laborious sun like a bejeweled prom queen, blowing watery kisses towards us and beckoning us to undress. Bo and I discarded our clothes, leaving them beside the spoils of bread and red wine, and dove into the creek's satin-gloved arms. Down at the river, the entire world appeared to be only inhabited by the two of us. As Bo and I splashed each other with acquiescent diamonds, and turtles slowly swam across our feet in a race that they would always lose to the hare, despite whether he was there or not, I realized that exact moment to be the first conjoined taste of an organic Australia that Bo and I had shared together. It encapsulated the very dream that had been born from our solitary kettle back in England. and almost forgotten. It was the fabric that had sewn our footsteps upon fantasies of the great down under. Together, far from looming buildings, peddling pedestrians and kamikaze traffic, Beau and I began to sample Australia as though it were a smorgasbord of serenity. It was not only the distance from city life that had begun to encourage my contentment, but the undulating illumination that came from being far away from the entanglements of other love. As I said before, it was just the two of us, and the rest of the world was on lunch break. So let's talk, I eventually encouraged, as Beau and I ascended a mound of rocks beside uncompetitive turtles and began to bask in the heat of the day. And whilst the diligent sun, as if to make up for his tardiness, feverishly warmed the rocks that were supporting my bare buttocks, I listened to Beau's testimony of travel. Beau began to fill the afternoon air with tales of his love for me, speaking of how he simply could not be without me. And despite whether or not I was ready to receive him, Beau assured me that only one thing had ever been certain in his heart, that he must try to find me, wherever I may have been. In hearing this, the lily pads looked across at the reeds shyly, wondering why no such grand declaration of love had ever been bestowed upon them in such a way. The reeds could only bow their heads in shame, because Beau had that kind of effect upon other couples. Beau then theatrically retold the events that had transpired during the beginning of his quest for me, where he had acquired my address from a version of Leaf who had thought Beau's pursuit of me to be of great comical value. Penniless but undeterred, Beau had packed a rucksack, walked to the nearest highway in Melbourne, and stuck out a hopeful thumb to the road. Upon hearing that, the ripples in the creek pushed themselves up against the riverbed suggestively, wet with the notion of his heroism. The riverbed, glad to finally receive some action. Beau then went on to tell me of how he had met a truck driver who had been so compelled with his quest for love that he had given Beau money straight from his own pocket, and a ride for most of the way, and his invaluable respect for all of eternity. Beau had travelled for days, sleeping on the streets, meeting a myriad of strangers and infecting them all with his tireless heart proclamations, because that kind of wild love will always serve to be an inspiration for all of us. Beau's heart had carried him with wings of protection. His gammy toe had hobbled behind him, still raptured with infection, and Beau, with a hitchhiker's heart, had finally found his way to me. His love knew no distance too far, no hurt too deep, because for me, Beau would have reached into the darkest depths of hell in order to save me. For Beau, every single pathway would always somehow lead him back to me. Upon hearing such a testimony, the late afternoon sun, forgetting his duties, sighed out in dreamy relief, cradled his slender rays against his face, and thought about the steamy night that he had just spent with the moon. True love would always excuse one's tardiness. I was officially swooned. Even with my best efforts at filling my being with interesting ventures, I could no longer pretend that there had not been a bow-shaped hole that was living inside of me. Despite my initial reservation, I was glad that he had found me. In heaven, not in hell. And I was happy that we could finally enjoy that paradise together. However, Clause 1 in the bill of our reunion clearly stated that hands were to be kept off of my goods. All I could offer Beau at that time was my friendship. I had no intention of further stressing my heart. I wanted peace and tranquility, and Beau respectfully understood. Therefore, we were friends for a whole 2.5 seconds. Friendship, it was discovered, was an impossible task to achieve for lovers who had known one another's bodies for so many years. Therefore, Beau and I, we slipped back into our familiarity with hot-blooded ease. When the hour was late and my guard was down, I felt an adoring mouth searching me out in the night, and found my tongue swirling around inside of it like an eel. It was a cave of secrets that I had always known. A blade of grass that only knew how to grow. It was a sticky toffee pudding that would always cause me to moan out in delight. Beau and I grasped at the straws of our continuity. We drank from those straws. We put them up our noses. We even put feathers on their ends and tickled one another's private parts. I became lost in a forest of Beau's never-ending love. Mine and Beau's connection was so strong that night that it felt almost new to me. It seemed that the more Beau and I let go of the idea of ownership towards one another, or what we thought a relationship to be, then the deeper our well of passion seemed to flow. Beau crawled into the caverns of my being like an insatiable stranger. But he touched my skin as if he had always known me. And together we began to sweat in a new kind of sweet release. Though something still felt slightly amiss as Beau kissed me. A missing link began to whisper of its identity, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then Beau placed his fingers in places that swallowed them up, and heaving and hoeing, I forgot what I was thinking of. A sexual revolution joined our party, and the fruits of his loins were saturated in possibility. After all that had happened to us, somehow Beau and I, we had still managed to keep one another. For days, Beau and I, we held hands and we watched waterfalls do their thing. In a haze of renewed love, we walked together amongst the forest, stared out into the same sparkling lakes, and tentatively looked upon the same dead trees that had been drowned within their stagnant waters. Both of us silently hoping not to endure the same watery fate. That's all from me, kids. That's my book. This is my sister.